I'm Dulcie Abraham Biltas, I'm curator of programs at Raw Material Company in Dakar, Senegal. And we are a Centre for Art, Knowledge and Society. It's been based in Dakar since 2011. And we really work through a number of different programs, testing out and playing with those links that exist between art making, knowledge production, society, and trying to be a space where the kind of critical thought and ideas that emerge from art making can enter into a fruitful and meaningful symbiosis with societal questions and issues in a broader sense. And so very much working to bring together different stakeholders, artists, activists, writers, educators, researchers, all sorts of different people. So we do that in many different ways, one of which is exhibition making. At Raw Material Company, we have a mixture of different backgrounds. I have an art history background. I studied in London and Paris. I have colleagues who studied also art history and curatorial studies, who studied political sciences. The director of programs at Raw Material Company, Marie-Hélène Pereira, she actually has a background in business management and started working at Raw Material Company when it was founded with the founding artistic director, Koyo Kuo. Over the last nearly 10 years has now developed her practice as a curator and as now the director of Raw. So it's also a place where different disciplines can come together, and we very much see it as the Raw school. So even though I have quite a classical art historical background, I think I've learned far more in the 4 years that I've been at Raw Material Company than I learned in the 4 years that it took to do my degree. We have a really mixed audience, and it's one of the most exciting parts of working there. Ever since Raw opened in 2011, we've been running weekly public programs that look at different aspects of Senegalese society and contemporary creativity. And that's been a really fundamental way of making sure that we have people of different disciplines and fields feeling like they have space at Raw and that there's stuff happening at Raw that's of use for them. We have, a really, really solid, good relationship with a lot of people who are based in Dakar. But we've also always endeavored to be a place where all of the brilliant creativity and idiosyncratic reflections that are happening in Dakar can meet a more international art world. A lot of our programs are about kind of bringing the local, saying the local is on a level with the international, and that these two can enter into dialogue in a really exciting way. The HKV had, or the curators of the exhibition, or the multi-stage project, had reached out to Koyo Kuo, our founding artistic director at Raw Material Company, and invited her and Raw Material Company to work on the Dakar station of the Love and Ethnology wider project. And in each station, there were 2 layers to the project. There was the translation of Fichte's writings that pertained to that place or that region. And then there was the more artistic component where Diedrichsen and Anselm Frank invited a curator or a group of curators or an art center to respond somehow curatorially, artistically to the writings of Fichte in that place. So we were invited to do that at Raw, and so I worked closely with Koyo over a few years, I guess, maybe 2 years, to develop that side of the project in Dakar. Well, this exhibition was quite particular because it combined this research element. So we're very much looking for the history of the relationship between Fichte Mau and Papisto Boy, but also we were kind of on the trail of Papisto Boy. So when we received the invitation, we needed a translation of the book. This was really important. Koyo is Germanophone, but I speak like 3 words of German. So while we were waiting for that first kind of proof of the translation of Psyche to be available to us, we knew that there were these interviews with Papisto Boy in the book, and that it also focused largely on the anti-psychiatry movement at Fan Hospital. And so this was like the starting point for our research. And so Papisto Boy was trying to, first of all, find out if he was still around. And unfortunately, he passed away in 2014. So the exhibition was a couple of years too late. But this also was something which was like, how can I say, the research was like a haunting on many levels, because there were people who would say, no, Papisto Boy is still alive. And other people who would say, no, he definitely passed away. And so we were navigating this very strange place with regards to the artist. Fichte, once his writings were available in French, it became this haunting of Dakar, of the way that he writes about it, the experiences he had, and this sense that Fan Hospital, the psychiatry unit, was a place where somehow this like very important artistic movement, these incredible artists, and this thinking, this very sort of avant-garde thinking on psychiatry, but also on ethnology, were all meeting. But it was hard to find out how, and in what form exactly. And so we would go there, and it's very strange to enter into a psychiatry unit and go into the archives and to have the words of Fichte in the back of your mind, and the interviews that he did with the people who were working there, who no longer work there, and to feel their presence in the corridors as you walk through them. So that was a very strange experience. There was this movement that started maybe in the 60s, maybe earlier, called anti-psychiatry, which was a rejection of like Freudian psychiatry, and suggesting that actually, we shouldn't remove people who are considered to have psychiatric issues from society, but that their difficulties come from an alienation. And so the treatment means incorporating them back into society and using cultural methods, like local cultural methods, particular to where they're from, the context that they know, to heal them. So in Fan Hospital, what that meant was that Henri Collomb, who was the director for a number of years and who was one of the main supporters of the anti-psychiatry movement, it meant that he explored techniques which found their basis in local culture. And so in large part in animism. You did also have electroshock treatment happening. So it wasn't like, black and white, like nothing ever is. One of the practices that Leonor Mau and Fichte were very interested in was the Ndup, which is a Lebu ceremony. Lebu is the ethnic group that comes from the coastal area around the Dakar Peninsula. The Ndup is a kind of a collective trance that is developed in order to help heal someone. At Fan, they would, encourage patients to participate in Ndup ceremonies. They also established what they called the Pench, and the Pench in Wolof and Lebu culture in particular is the space, usually under a tree, where people gather to discuss issues of the community, to make decisions, to organize. And so they established this Pench space at Fan Hospital also, which was a space where the staff at Fan, they weren't supposed to wear their uniform, so they would come in kind of civilian clothes. And it was a place where suddenly everyone became equal. It wasn't patient, staff, well, unwell. It was everyone on the same level. And it would be a free space. And so what these little kind of bits of gossip and rumors suggest is that the Laboratoire Agitart were coming to these Pench meetings, and that this became a place of great kind of creative output, really. It was quite a unique experiment at the time. It stands to reason that for people who are interested in the avant-garde, and the Laboratoire Agitart were very invested in the practice of Antonin Artaud, so a theatre of cruelty. We see how that can kind of come into play in a space like the Pench of Fan. We're not quite sure how Papiste Sauboy met Léonore Mao and Hubert Fichte. This is something that we tried to get to the bottom of in a number of different ways when we were researching for the exhibition, and we couldn't pinpoint how they met. Papiste Sauboy was a client of Fan Hospital and potentially using the psychiatric services there at one point, whether an inpatient or an outpatient. And because Mao and Fichte were spending so much time there, that's how they met. There are hints of Papiste Sauboy having had psychiatric issues. But this is a bold claim, and it's not something that we can say with any concrete certainty. And this is also someone's reputation. So, yeah, we're not totally sure. They have at Fan Hospital in the psychiatric unit, they do have archives, and I visited the archives a number of times. But of course, you can't find outpatient information. For very understandable and correct ethical reasons. What I was trying to do when I was researching in the archives was to see if there was any evidence that the Laboratoire Agitart, so the Senegalese collective, had been spending time at Fan Psychiatric Hospital. There are also hints that they were going and doing workshops at the hospital, but there's no proof of this. We also, one of the artists that was featured in the exhibition, Thierry Dussal, he was very open about the fact that he was interned at Fan Psychiatric Hospital in the late 70s. But he seems to never have directly crossed paths with Fichte and Mao. All of these things were kind of happening around Fan Psychiatric Hospital and the anti-psychiatry movement there in the late 70s. But we couldn't find any solid evidence for all of it. You know, these rumors and this gossip, which is interesting because that's actually a very important part of Fichte's work, from my understanding. Saying that gossip and rumor is important. It's a very good way of understanding a culture and people. So we sort of leaned into that. Papiste Sauboy does feature in the research of a few scholars through talking to people who have worked in street art or who have looked quite closely at the way that art functions in the public space in Senegal. We were able to understand that Papiste Sauboy is actually known amongst people working in that sphere as one of the first graffiti artists in the country. His work on the public walls, and particularly that big wall near the Bel Air beach, was a precursor to a very significant art movement in Senegal that happened in the late 1980s called the Set Setal movement, which means in Wolof, to be clean and to make clean. And the Set Setal movement emerged in response to the austerity of the 1980s, the structural adjustment programs that were being enacted all across the world. Huge amounts of public services in Senegal were being stripped to the bare minimum. And people living in, well, this was also combined with a rural exodus. So many young people leaving the rural zones of Senegal to go and live in Dakar, the capital city. And so you had suddenly a lot of young people in the city and a very weak state. So public space became kind of the terrain, the playground for these young people to take ownership of not just the city, but their lives, and really, in a symbolic sense, the direction of the country and the future of the country. And a lot of that involved cleaning up and embellishing the public space. They would paint local heroes or local figures of importance on the walls, and in this way kind of erect new monuments. And this is a city which has a colonial past and which has colonial monuments. And it's fascinating because it was a way for young people to sort of, reclaim their history and reorganize what would be important in the future of their country. And this is something that we see in Papisto Boy's work, where he puts on the same level figures of local importance. So whether those are marabouts, so spiritual leaders, Islamic spiritual leaders, or figures from animistic folklore, with Muhammad Ali, or figures from Greek mythology. He combines them all in this amazing kind of orchestra, which I think Uber Fichte is right to say this, that it becomes an incredible insight into the imaginary of Senegalese society at that time. Huge challenge for us when preparing the exhibition was trying to find documentation of Papisto Boy's work. He would tend to do the walls with whatever he found. So if people wanted to have their picture taken in front of the mural, he would charge them and he would use that money to buy paint. He would also use anything he could find. And so every year in the rainy season, a lot of one layer or part of the mural would wash away and he would start again. And so you think if you had every year photos taken of the walls, you would have this incredible archive of the changing Senegalese imaginary, throughout the period that he was working. Léonormald's photos from that period are the best archive that we have. There are some more recent photos from, I think, around the early 2000s, but which tend to be more snapshots, less a kind of complete, almost full panorama of the wall. He wasn't producing artwork that he was then selling. There was also talk of some drawings that he did maybe being in a collection, another private collection in Germany, which we tried to track down. But with the archives being in Germany and us being based in Dakar, that was also really difficult because there was such a lack of archives. Was that we were really lucky that the wall still exists, the wall that Léonormald photographed. And so a lot of it is gone, but at least you're able to go and stand there and you can still kind of see these traces of what was once there, and you can have you can try to imagine what it would have been like. Still in the industrial area, so there's still people going, back and forth every day. And I think if it weren't for that, things would have been a lot harder. Papisto Boy, and this comes up in the writings or the interviews with Fichte, but it's also something that you see on the wall a lot, is that he signs as the artist who lives. It seems that he was very attached to this part of Dakar, which has beautiful beaches. There's a fishing community, but it's also heavily industrialized. He speaks about wanting to create something beautiful for the workers who are going back and forth to the factories every day. And that gesture for the wider population, society that he's part of, and the community that he lives in, is something that was also really the starting point for the exhibition and how we were thinking about the exhibition. Of an artist who lives on a beach, is, for all intents and purposes, kind of on the margins of the contemporary art scene that was, popular in Dakar at the time, and yet who was extremely engaged in the social life and the society around him. What's interesting is not that long ago I was driving around that area, and there's a big Catholic cemetery, not far from the wall. And behind a pile of twigs, I glimpsed another mural. And it was clearly Papisto Boy. And it was using Catholic motifs. So there was the Virgin Mary, there's the candle, there's the rosary. And one of the things that's on my to-do list is to get in touch with the cemetery and find out if they know whether this was a commission, or if, again, was this Papisto Boy making a gesture towards the community that was using that space. There is another wall that we know that he did, which was a commission by the French Institute in downtown Dakar. And that wall is still there. It's in okay shape, better shape than the wall in Bel Air. But it's interesting because Papis Darboy deals much more explicitly with issues of kind of public health and the economy in this wall, but he does also include figures from colonial history. So because that's a commission, we have a slightly different relationship to the wall, unlike the one in Bel Air, which is very much was, Papis Darboy spontaneously seemed to want to work on it. And those are the three sites that we know of, apart from in his home village as well. He did some paintings in some of the houses. Those are the three sites, really, that we know of. Regards to questions of authorship, the walls are Papis Darboy, the photos are Léonard Mao, and the text is Fichte. Papis Darboy was doing the walls with or without Fichte and Mao, and so while they maybe were important for giving him a platform in Germany or in Europe, I only see their authorship as going so far. Léonard Mao was working on this bigger project that was the project of a lifetime, and that was the project of a lifetime for Fichte as well. We're very grateful that in that journey, she managed to produce these fantastic archives of Papis Darboy's work. The text, I think it's called I Beg You to Build Walls so that Papis Darboy Papsam can paint them. By Hubert Fichte, he's really onto something in this text. That text is a useful starting point for understanding the significance of Papis Darboy's work, particularly for an international audience. There was this moment which was incredible when we were preparing the exhibition, because we had the three of Léonard Mao's photos of the wall in Bel Air blown up to almost life size. When they were delivered, the sort of rolls to Raw Material Company, they were delivered late. And I said to the guys, what happened? And they said it took us so long to get them out of the studio, the printing studio, because everyone was coming and having a look. And everyone wanted to sit there and study kind of every single aspect, because it was an extremely relatable image. It was an image that really spoke to a visual culture in Senegal. It's so powerful. But understandably, an audience in Switzerland or Germany or the UK does not have the cultural references to understand or to feel the power of placing Muhammad Ali next to Cheikh Ahmadou Bamba, who is the founder of one of the most important Islamic brotherhoods in Senegal. I can't remember if they're next to each other, but these are elements that were definitely combined on the wall. The question is really, how can you understand the issues, as a curator who isn't from or based in Senegal? How can you understand the issues that are animating the work, the context within which it's being produced? How can you find out what those issues are without looking for the answers, but looking for what those issues are, and I think try and expose those as well. We then proceeded to speak to Thierno Seydou Sall. So Thierno is a poet, first and foremost, and he describes himself as a wandering poet. He is someone who we've worked with for a number of years. He's really part of the kind of Raw Material Company family. Thierno, as I mentioned, is very open about the fact that he was interned at the Fan Psychiatric Unit in the late 1970s. His whole poetic and artistic practice was born at that time. And this is no secret. He talks about this in much of his practice, and it's a driving force in his work, because he unfortunately was forced to have electroshock treatment a number of times. He today talks about his poetry being an electroshock poetry, in the way that the electroshock was designed to kind of wake someone up out of a state of madness. He wants his poetry to wake society up from their state of madness. And what's interesting as well is that Cherno met Issa Samb, the artist and one of the founding members of the Laboratoire Agit d'Art, at Fan Hospital. Because Issa, and from what we understand, maybe some other members of the Laboratoire, were coming to the hospital and they were running kind of like workshops, drama workshops, art workshops. And Issa took Cherno and said, "You don't need this." And he would take him back out into the neighborhoods, and particularly the neighborhood of the Medina, and he would take him to the nightclubs. And he would say, "You need to be doing poetry." And he would take him from house to house. And that's how Cherno became the wandering poet. Knowing this history of Cherno's, we thought this resonates too closely with the interests and the history of what Mao and Fichte were doing in Dakar. And also Papisto Boy surely fits in there somewhere. Cherno was a great help in the research. He wasn't aware of Papisto Boy's work before, but he felt a really strong connection to the work. The position that Cherno occupies, to this day, of someone who deliberately places himself on the margins so that he can say things that other people won't necessarily say, but that he's doing it for the good of society, also chimed so clearly with Papisto Boy, tied in to a major concern of Fichte and Mao, which is, what does it mean to be the other? And how does the other fit into society? And how have we maybe got our understanding of the other in society wrong, particularly in, German culture for them. But, and this is where, they were very interested in Black cultures and cultures of the Black Atlantic, because they felt that the relationship to the other was, that maybe there was a different understanding of what it means to be other and a questioning of whether there is an other. Then the exhibition grew out of that. I think for the German-speaking context, we were in touch with the foundation that has the rights to Léonore Mao's images. Mm-hmm. And we were also working quite closely with the curatorial research team at HKW. So they were instrumental, for example, in helping us get the photo book of the walls. So yeah, it was mainly through that foundation and through the HKW themselves. We also were able to get hold of the big photo book of Léonore Mao's, which is also called Psyché, which was really helpful in putting together the exhibition. And I guess it is the foundation. They have already a very big online archive. And so this was really helpful, because when we were deciding the images of Léonore Mao that we would like to include in the exhibition, we were able to really kind of go through the book and the website and sort of go, "Ooh, this one makes sense. This really chimes with what we're trying to say." We included images that were from Senegal, but also from the West Africa region in general. It wasn't so important to us that the images come from Fan or come from Senegal, because it was his travels in the region, Fichte and Mao's travels in the region, that informed what they were interested in. So that wasn't so important to us. What was very important to us was we didn't want to show images of violence, and we also didn't want to show images where grown-ups could be recognizable. While the anti-psychiatry movement took a foothold in Senegal, and Senegal has many kind of different approaches to mental health, it still can be a taboo subject. This is a concern that you have, obviously, in particular when you're showing the images in the context within which they were made, and something that I do think some of our collaborators who maybe don't have that same sense of responsibility might not take into account. Really important for us that if we showed images where people were recognizable, that these were not incriminating images, nor were they images of pain or violence or suffering, of which there are many in the Léonore Mao archives. It's not something that we felt was necessary to show for what we wanted to talk about. And also we're, of course, extremely conscious of what it means to reproduce images of violence, particularly against Black bodies. We communicate to the HKW with regards to what they were going to display in Berlin, and also what they were going to put in the catalogue. The thing is that there's a difference between being an archive and doing exhibitions. Those are two different activities, right? And while you always curate an archive, it's about safeguarding those objects, that serve some kind of understanding of history, one hopes. But how can you do that in an ethical way? I think you're right that they at least should be blurred, or there should be a trigger warning, or you should have to request, there can be a description and you can request to access them, or, so that people can't just kind of fall upon them. We felt that we needed other voices through an artistic form to be put on a level and in dialogue with Léonore Maul's photos, so that there could be this kind of exchange happening. And what we did is we knew we wanted some of the images of Papias Boy's wall to be the sort of focal point. So we as I said, we expanded those, drew them up to almost life size, and then we had this kind of painting on the wall, just with these three, it was a dark gray, a medium gray, and the white wall, that would help the viewer to kind of situate themselves in the space of the image, so that it would become quite immersive. And we have this bench in the middle of those three walls as an invitation for people to kind of sit down and almost meditate on their surrounding. And what's quite wonderful, one of the images that we chose was a photo taken by Léonore Maul, and you have Papisto's wall, and in front of it you have a man praying. We really wanted to include this photo because we felt that it was interesting to have the wall and then a public, and to invite I think we thought that would help the viewer to kind of place themselves, therefore, within the space of the photograph. And particularly the fact that it was someone praying, which is one of the most omnipresent gestures and activities in Senegal, a country that's over 95% Muslim. And then there is such a rich amount of photography that Léonore Maul did in the region, and so we did want to show some of those other work, but that would maybe help to add an ambiance more than anything. And so the images that we chose were very much in order to capture a mood. We wanted these images to almost be like a chord, like a musical chord that could sit as like a connector between all the other pieces. So they were in the middle of the room on two walls facing one another. Tcherno, we didn't include his poetry. We did in the catalogue, but for many years Tcherno has also been drawing in the margins of his notebooks. And these drawings have never been shown as standalone artwork. Prior to the exhibition, prior to getting the commission from HKV, I had said to Tcherno, you should do these drawings. Here's a notepad, and you should just have a go at drawing. And he had gone away on a residency to Morocco, and he came back and he presented me with the book full of these incredible drawings. When we were preparing the exhibition, there was a kind of light bulb moment of, we should include these drawings of Tcherno's, which just show the most phenomenally moving figures who are somewhere, we recognize them, we recognize ourselves in them, but they're not figurative particularly. They're somewhere between figurative and abstract. They're unusual, they're playful, they're all different, but together they form quite a moving metaphor. So it was a real pleasure to be able to show those as well. And then the final aspect of the display was a video we came across. And here we return to the question of authorship. The video is by a French filmmaker called Isabelle Thomas. But it's about the artist Maïsma. And Maïsma is also, like Papias Boy, an artist who was working mostly on walls. We know even less about him than we do about Papisto. We haven't seen any of his work emerging in recent years, so we're not sure if he is still around. But Isabel was following him for a number of years, I think in the late 90s or early noughties. And she wanted to do this film about him. And he said, no, I will write and you will speak. And so you will be my journalist. The film shows Dakar and shows his murals in Dakar and on the outskirts of the city. And the voiceover is Isabel, but she's reading Meismer's words. From his words, we got the title for the show, which is All of the Wrongs in the World, I Gathered Them Up. We had that on a screen next to, on a wall next to Chelna's drawings. And that also brought in some sound and some movement. And what's quite good because it shows quite a lot of Dakar, urban scenes from Dakar. So it gives then a bit of a more modern context, visual context to Leonor's photographs. For this exhibition, I know that we had a public talk on marginality and the idea of the margins in Senegalese society. I think there was another aspect to the public programming. But yeah, I remember that those were very well received. We included, I think on the panel, we had 2 writers who have really dealt with these issues extensively in their writing. And also we had a psychiatrist he's now retired, as much as any psychiatrist retires, and who worked for many, many years at FAN. That was really interesting to kind of bring him together with these writers who have been part of the avant-garde movement. What was wonderful as well was to hear from so many people who came to the exhibition and said, I had always seen Papisto's work, but I didn't really know more about him. So that was very moving, and it was great to kind of incite people's interest in that way. It's always very interesting when you're invited to work on a project which is seemingly about one thing, that project then in these strange ways kind of unveils a whole area of research or interest that you didn't know until you started, but you had been wanting to look into. That was really the case with this project, where the invitation from the HKV and the Goethe Institute as well opened the door for us to look into a whole swathe of art history and cultural history in Senegal that merits a lot more research.